Hey everybody, Adam Kenny from Adam Kenny Art here. We're going to talk about color today. I want to talk about hues in particular. Hue is an attribute of color. There's three attributes to color. There's lightness and darkness, which is known as value. There is the intensity of the color, basically whether it's kind of green or neutral, or gray or neutral, or if it's very vibrant. Okay. So let's talk about hue. Hue is this third attribute, which is the family of color for whatever color we're talking about. So here I just want to show as an illustration, this is like two umbrellas that are side by side, rainbow umbrellas. If this was a black and white photo, we wouldn't be able to tell what colors these were. We could tell how light they were or dark they were, and maybe that could inform our understanding and be like, okay, well, I'm going to guess that this is red or blue or yellow. But it really wouldn't give us enough information. And this is why hue is important for us to understand and see and think about, especially as we're painting or drawing or designing. We can, really define what it is we want our viewer to experience. So what is color? Where does it come from? One thing we can look at is look at the wheel, the color wheel. And the color wheel comes from Isaac Newton. He did this it really does come from him. He did this experiment where he had light coming into a prism, and the prism shot out these colors, and it created the spectrum on the wall. We'll look at what the spectrum kind of looks like here in a second. And his big idea was, well, let's take this spectrum and let's curve it around on itself. And so where you have red, which is on the opposite end of the spectrum, and violet on the other polar end, and you combine them to be side by side. So we see red is right next to violet here on his color wheel. Now his has the traditional rainbow colors of including indigo. So you have the Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. That'll get changed down the line by somebody else. We'll look at that too. But this is what he came up with. He related it to music. You can kind of see musical notes here. It was just this whole idea for him. Where does color come from? It comes from light, right? And light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We have all these waves bouncing around us. I'm not a scientist. I can't tell you anything about any of that. But you just have to believe me. This is what I've been told, is that essentially some of these waves are visual. We can see them. Some of the waves are auditory or can carry communication in different ways. I don't know, maybe it's not auditory, but carry communication in different ways. Some of them are very dangerous, some of these waves. Some of them are not very dangerous at all. But light is what reveals color. We're able to then perceive color of objects and things around us because light is part of this energy that's coming from the sun, basically. So here's the spectrum. And the thing that this illustrates is that colors travel at different speeds. Relatively speaking, they're traveling very, very fast. There's nothing where we're like, oh my gosh, look how slow that color is. But what Newton, discovered in his spectrum is that, all these colors are always in the same order, right? You never have red, green, yellow. They're always in the same order. And so he said, well, as the light's hitting the prism and then these colors are shooting out, the angle at which they're shooting indicates that they're moving at different speeds. And so that's just something to know, I suppose, as we think about the way our eyes might work with color. So light hits an object, and some of the energy is absorbed, some of it is reflected, and we see that visible energy. So here's an example. You have a blue object, and blue is actually bouncing its color into our eyes, and our eyes are perceiving that object as blue. And you might think, well, if it's a blue object, shouldn't the light hit it and it become like it is blue? That's kind of a weird way of looking at it, but that's kind of the way we think about it. But really what's happening is it's absorbing all that energy except for the color that it is. And we're perceiving it as that color because that's the color that we're seeing from all that light hitting it. Same thing with this red object. Down here on the lower left, you have red hitting a white object, and that white object is appearing red. So if you think about like at twilight, you have this sun is coming through the atmosphere at a different angle relative to you on the earth, and light changes. The colors of things change. Sometimes you get this beautiful red sunset, and then that red light is hitting things and making things look more reddish. So light impacts the colors of an object. Now, an object's color is intrinsic to that object in the sense that it has what's called a local color, and I believe that's basically like at a molecular level. It's somehow influencing the local color of that object. But light hitting something can further influence the way that the color of that object is perceived. Okay, a black object is one that is absorbing all of the spectrum, all of that visible or visual spectrum, right? And it's pretty much impossible for us to have purely black objects because light also bounces off of them in sort of a different way. We get this sort of light refraction or this highlight, right, off of something. So we are getting some of that light bouncing off of that object, but the object itself is still black. In fact, there's experiments with this. You've heard of black objects that sort of absorb energy and can make you, like if you're wearing a black shirt on a sunny day, it can make you hotter than if you're wearing a white shirt on a sunny day. The experiment is, and you can try this yourself, I've seen somebody do it, you can take a black cup and a white cup and you can put water at the same level in each of them, set them outside in the sun, and after a day or two or whatever, you'll see that the water in the black cup is lower. It's been more evaporated than the one in the white cup. So there's been more energy that's been sort of warming up that cup versus the other one. So this is just a little visual of how our eyes interact with the spectrum. Our eyes have rods and cones in them. Maybe you've heard of that. The rods are all about picking up on light and dark. The cones are what pick up on color, and we have a red cone, a green cone, and a blue cone, and that's all said in quotes, right? Red, green, blue. Because mostly each one of those cones kind of picks up on that color, that wavelength, essentially. And it kind of it picks up on other colors as well, but not as strongly as that one color. And where these, essentially what we're seeing here is we're seeing the gamut of colors that our eyes can perceive. So there is some empty spaces there. There is color around us that we may not just be seeing because our eyes cannot perceive those colors. So when we see color from the sun, from light, we are experiencing what's called additive mixing, which is, actually maybe a better way of talking about it is this. If you have red light, green light, and blue light, and you combine them, you get white light. And I believe Newton did another experiment where he had a prism, where he had the rainbow going through a prism, and out the other side you get white light. They combine again. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's something that happened. So we see this with our monitors, and we're going to see an example here. But our monitors and our TVs and stuff, they're made up of little pixels that have red, green, and blue. And they get lit at different sort of intensities by light, or they don't get lit, and different individual lights can get sort of lit up. And depending on how they're lit up, our eyes merge those lights because we're further away and there's so many tiny pixels that we see colors that aren't really there because our eyes combine them together. But if you were to take a green light and a red light and combine them, you'd get a yellow. If you were to, which is the secondary in this case, if you had your red and your blue and you combine them, you'd get magenta, and if you had green and blue, you'd get cyan. So that's what we see here. Our primaries are red, green, and blue. Our secondaries are yellow, magenta, and cyan, which we'll come back to that in a second. But here's an example of pixels and television monitors and things, and how our eyes start to sort of combine. As we zoom out from them, our eyes start to combine them as they're lit at different rates and things. We get these images. So the opposite of additive mixing is subtractive mixing, which is what we mostly deal with when we're painting or if we're drawing with colored pencils or whatever. If we're combining pigments together, we start to get subtractive mixing. And probably the most commonly used subtractive mixing is through printing, through our printers and through whatever else, publications. And the primary colors that they use are cyan, magenta, yellow, and key black. Key black is essentially utilized for logistical purposes mostly, but also it does flesh out the darker tones of these colors. The idea here is it's called subtractive mixing because as you combine these colors, you lose the sort of light, the white, it subtracts. There's another way of explaining that. I'm not doing a good job. I'm not going to dive into that. We're going to keep this video as short as we can talking about this deep subject. If you notice, the primaries here, cyan, magenta, and yellow, create secondaries, which are red, green, and blue, which, if we go backwards, are the primaries of additive mixing. So we do a little flip-flop here, which is really interesting to see how these colors relate to each other. So the 4-color printing process, as I mentioned before, like comic books and publications and newspapers and whatever else, they use these cyan, yellow, magenta dots of color along with key black to help us see, as we zoom out from the patterns that they create, actual images, right? Realistic images. They're not purely realistic, but they are more realistic than you get realistic colors from these colors. Now, again, logistically speaking, most printers just use those 4, but you can get, for a little bit of a higher cost, you can get more colors. Like there's 12-color printers. I have a 6-color printer, which is uses these colors, where you have light magenta, light cyan, and then yellow, magenta, and cyan, and black. And it just creates pictures with a bit more variety to their gamut. So yeah, I won't dive into that, but essentially you can create even more variety within your colors using a slightly more expensive, better, high, what am I trying to say? Top of the line? I don't have a top of the line printer, but you know what I mean. If you combine these two ideas, cyan, magenta, and yellow, and red, green, and blue, you can get what's called the Newbie color wheel. And you'll notice on this color wheel, you have very little orange. You have a lot more green, a range of green. You have more of a range of reds to blues, but violet is kind of a smaller amount. This color wheel reflects the spectrum of color a little bit more accurately than the one we traditionally use, which we'll look at here in a second. But you can use this color wheel to great advantage. This is a color wheel that a lot of artists are using these days, at least experimentally, to try to get more vibrant mixtures of color. And, we'll dive into color schemes in another video, but you can take colors on opposite sides of the color wheel and get a nice harmonious color scheme with a lot of contrast, but also, you can also blend those colors together to get some good neutrals. And typically green is opposite red on the color wheel that we will be looking at. But right now here it's opposite magenta. And blue is opposite orange. Often you see like an orange and blue. Here it's opposite yellow. Cyan and red, normally green is opposite red, but we have cyan. So you see how this mixes up a little bit of our color relationships? But if we look at the spectrum, I'm going to go back here a little bit. You'll notice there is very little orange on this spectrum, and there's much more green, right? So if you look at Newton's color wheel, he accounts for that. You actually see this. You see orange is not given the same amount of space as red or yellow or green, and indigo is not given much space either. We can kind of see a bit of indigo in here, and it was kind of forced in a little bit. So let's skip ahead a little bit here. This is another color wheel. This is Albert Mansell's 10 primary color wheel. He's also allotting a lot more space towards greens and blues and reds than he is towards orange. And we're going to skip over that one. This one this is interesting, but it's not that interesting. This is an update to the wheel that Newton came up with. This is an update that von Goethe came up with, which he got rid of indigo, and he's like, no, we're just going to deal with 6 colors. We got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. Get rid of indigo. And this is what he devised, and this is what we tend to work with now as painters, as artists. We have a more modern understanding of his color wheel, which is hundreds of years old, where our primary colors are yellow, red, and blue. And from those colors, we can get our secondary colors, which are orange, green, and violet. So yellow and red combined make orange, yellow and blue make green, red and blue make violet. And then you have tertiary colors, which are the colors between your primaries and your secondaries, which are the combinations of those two. So whichever one they're between, it's a combination of those two colors. So for instance, yellow and green have yellow-green between them. Green and blue have blue-green between them. Blue and violet have blue-violet, and so on. So this is our red, yellow, blue color wheel that we traditionally are used to using. Warms and cools, as you're using pigments, this is more of an aside than anything, but it's good to know how your pigments are going to interact. So there are different types of blues. There are blues that are more green, and there are blues that are more violet. Ultramarine blue is great for mixing to make a violet. Phthalo blue is great for mixing to create more of a green, especially mixing it with a yellow or something like that to get a good green. There's different types of yellows. Hansa yellow, I think, is a bit more on the orange side of yellow, and lemon yellow is a bit more on the sort of slightly greenish side of yellow. So understanding this as you're picking your colors out, it will help you understand, like, okay, well, when I mix this red and this blue together, I'm not getting violet. Why am I not getting violet? I'm getting like a brown. Well, it's just because of the type of red you're using or the type of blue that you're using. So let's go to the next page here, and we'll see what I mean. This is like a mapped out pigment map on the color wheel by, it looks like, Bruce McAvoy of the Artist's Color Wheel. This is a great resource just to sort of look at occasionally and see, like, oh, okay, when I use pyrrole red, that is closer to yellow than quinacridone magenta, which makes sense, obviously. And the more you familiarize yourself with these colors, the more you'll know that that's kind of an obvious thing. But let's say you started with cadmium scarlet, right? You think scarlet's red. That's a great color to use. And then you see phthalo blue, and you're like, okay, blue, phthalo blue. So I got blue and I got scarlet. Great colors to create a violet or a purple. Well, if you draw a line between those two colors, like connecting the dots, which I'll just do here. Actually, you can probably see it with my mouse. The in-between on scarlet and phthalo blue is like right in here, which is a very, like, the center of this wheel is neutral. It's a very neutral color. You're going to end up with something probably a little bit more, it's not going to be quite green, but it's going to be brown, right? You're not going to get a violet. If you want to get a violet, you got to mix, and you want to start with blue and red, you got to start with like an ultramarine blue and a quinacridone rose, right? We don't really use cadmium red anymore, but cadmium red and ultramarine blue would get you something closer to a violet than phthalo blue and cadmium scarlet. Okay, so this little mapping helps you understand, like, okay, even though burnt sienna feels red-orange, it's also kind of neutral. And so when I combine this red-orange, this burnt sienna with, like, I don't know, lemon, I'm not getting like a really vibrant orange. I'm getting something kind of more close to a yellow ochre, right? This can help explain that for you. So that's just an overview of hue, right? And the more you understand your color wheel, and we're going to get into color schemes in another video, the more you understand your color wheel and you understand hues, the more you can understand, like, okay, I can take this color paint and this color paint and this color paint, and I can start with these, and I can get a whole variety of different colors. I can also experiment with different color wheels and whatever else, color relationships. So hopefully this has been informative for you. If you have questions, throw them in the comments. I might be able to answer them for you, or somebody else could come along and answer them for you. If you liked this video, like this video, and then maybe share it with somebody or post it somewhere where you're like, hey, this was a cool video and I study art and I think this is neat. Or share it with a classmate if you are studying, if this helped clear some things up for you. Or comment or subscribe or whatever. I'm a painter. I'm hoping to mostly do painting videos, but some of this theory stuff is helpful, I think, for me and for you. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and I will see you on the next one.